Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. We have our third panel in this conference on dealing with the past in East Central Europe, and in fact, that's what the topic of this panel happens to be. It's an all-Polish panel, and my colleagues and friends, starting from my immediate left, are Professor Paweł Machcewicz from Toruń University in Poland, Rafał Stobiecki from the University of Łódź. Paweł Machcewicz is a historian who used to work for the Institute for National Memory and is now teaching in Toruń, and the author of a book that just came out on Radio Free Europe. Mr. Stobiecki, Dr. Stobiecki, is one of the leading historiographers in Poland. And last but not least, my good friend Marek Kornat, who works for the Institute of History of the Polish Academy of Sciences in Warsaw and also teaches at the Higher School of Business in Nowy Sącz, and who is the author of numerous books, one of which is being printed even as we speak. So why don't we begin with Professor Machcewicz.
Thank you very much. We are supposed to discuss the politics of history, which was already mentioned this morning. First, I would like to analyze very briefly the origins and the meaning of this notion, the politics of history. In Poland, this notion was constructed, was invented by conservative intellectuals close to the Law and Justice Party, more or less in 2003, 2004, when this party was in the opposition against, excuse me? The names will be given very soon, of course. The names and the documents, not only the name. And the main goals and definitions of politics of history were explained in this book, the book Pamięć and Odpowiedzialność, Remembrance and Responsibility. One of the authors is here. It will be the first name, is Zdzisław Krasnodębski. And another author was Kazimierz Michał Ujazdowski, who very soon would become the Minister of Culture and National Heritage after the Law and Justice victory in 2005, and Ujazdowski will become one of the main promoters of the politics of history. So what was the main argument outlined in this book and in many press publications by those people who constructed this idea? First of all, that the Polish state should play a more active role in commemorating the national past, in building current civic and patriotic values on the basis of tradition, on those elements of the Polish historical past which should be regarded as a source of inspiration for present generations. Such traditions as a legacy of anti-communist opposition, of Polish heroism and martyrology from the Second World War, Polish uprisings in the 19th century, the tradition of Rzeczpospolita Obojga Narodów, so the Polish state in the early modern and modern centuries, especially in the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, with the state with its democratic institutions, multinational character, and religious tolerance. Politics of history as a political and ideological project was based on two very critical assessments of developments in Poland after 1989. The first assessment was that so-called Trzecia Rzeczpospolita, the Third Republic, so the state which was created in 1989 after the collapse of the communism in Poland, that this Trzecia Rzeczpospolita neglected history, did not exploit tradition, national tradition, to build the moral and emotional identification of Poles with their newly regained independent and democratic state. As a symbolic example of this attitude was presented a slogan from Aleksander Kwaśniewski's presidential campaign in 1995, "Let's choose the future." So let's forget about the past. But not only post-communists were blamed for neglecting history and tradition, the same was said about Solidarity liberal elites dominant in the Polish politics in the early 90s, who were accused of having a political deal with post-communists. One of its results was supposed to be marginalization of history, especially with respect to the communist crimes on one hand and the heroic story of anti-communist opposition on the other hand. those Solidarity elites were also accused of having been interested predominantly in building liberal political and economic institutions, and at the same time having been strongly concerned about the possibility of awakening of Polish demons of nationalism and xenophobia, which could jeopardize the political and economic progress. That is why they did their best to keep history and tradition out of the mainstream of the public sphere, so said those who supported the new idea of this politics of history. The second important assumption of the politics of history was that if history and tradition even played in some respects an important role after 1989, it was not the history of pride, but rather the history of shame. Politicians, historians, and mass media were blamed for focusing mostly on those parts of Polish history which were not heroic, not glorious, but rather shameful, like Polish anti-Semitism, expulsion of Germans from Poland after 1945, expulsions of Ukrainians from southeastern Poland in 1947, so-called Akcja Wisła, Vistula operation. In this respect, one may say that politics of history was the reaction to the Jedwabne debate, which started in Poland in the year 2000, and for a long time dominated the public discussions in our country. This debate was started by the publication of a famous book, The Neighbors, by Jan Tomasz Gross, who analyzed the massacre of the Jewish inhabitants of a small town, Jedwabne, committed by their Polish neighbors in 1941. In a way, I would say that politics of history was also, as a special political or ideological project, was also the reaction to the activities of Erika Steinbach and the German Congress of Expellees, who in 2003, more or less, started a new campaign in which they reminded the expulsions, accused Poles of committing crimes against Germans after the war, and demanded the commemoration of the German sufferings in the 40s. So, according to the promoters of the politics of history, there was a danger that Poles should be now treated more as perpetrators than the victims. Conservative intellectuals declared that Poles now needed more pride than shame in dealing with history, that they needed so-called affirmative patriotism instead of critical patriotism. A very important chapter of this book was written by Dariusz Gawin, who criticized Jan Józef Lipski, one of the icons of the Polish democratic opposition, for his famous essay, Two Fatherlands, Two Patriotisms, published in 1981. In this essay, Lipski suggested that Poles should start to discuss less heroic elements of their history, harms inflicted by Poles on their neighbors, Jews, Ukrainians, Germans. For Dariusz Gawin, this intellectual and moral attitude was partly responsible for this patriotism of shame, which allegedly dominated the Polish national and historical conscience after 1989. Law and Justice Party and many conservative intellectuals declared that the time now has come to promote this affirmative patriotism. Politics of history became one of the pillars of the political program of the Law and Justice Party, which won the election in 2005. Even before that, Lech Kaczyński, as the mayor of Warsaw, created the Museum of Warsaw Uprising, which was a major accomplishment, and in my opinion, the most important one so far of the whole politics of history, and this museum obviously concentrated on Polish heroism and sufferings. Before I turn to an analysis of the politics of history in practice during the 2 years of Law and Justice in power, let me comment on this theoretical, ideological basis of politics of history as it was formulated before 2005. In my opinion, two major assessments of politics of history as this political and ideological project with respect to the situation after '89 were far-fetched or even to some extent erroneous, false simply. First, the notion of politics of history was of course not used before 2003, let's say, but it was simply not true, it was not correct that the Polish democratic state after '89 was passive and indifferent vis-à-vis history. After '89, the names of the streets and squares were changed, heroes of the Polish anti-communist opposition and victims of communist and Soviet repressions were honored, communist monuments were pulled down, and the new monuments were erected. I mentioned in the morning the monument devoted to the victims of the Soviet repression during the war. Another example could be a monument of the Polish Home Army in front of the Polish Parliament. School curricula and textbooks were changed. Functionaries of the security apparatus from the 40s and the 50s, so from this most brutal time of Stalinism, were deprived of special privileges that were enjoyed by veterans in Poland. As I said yesterday, lustration law was passed in 1997, and the law about the Institute of National Remembrance was passed in 1998. This law was vetoed by the President Kwaśniewski, but this veto was rejected by the Parliament again, and in the year 2000 the Institute of National Remembrance started to function, and in my opinion this moment was the real turning point in terms of politics of history, although again without using this notion. Institute of National Remembrance was a very large institution with many local branches dealing with the whole Polish history after the outbreak of the Second World War, so altogether the period of the Second World War and the whole period of the communist dictatorship. Institute of National Remembrance carried out many initiatives in terms of education, research, commemoration, and also prosecution of the communist crimes. One can, of course, argue that all these efforts, especially before the founding of the Institute of National Remembrance, were not persistent enough. One can be critical of specific developments or decisions in this realm, but it was only a political and propaganda slogan to say that before Law and Justice came to power, Polish state was absolutely passive and indifferent vis-à-vis history. The second miscalculation, or at least a great exaggeration, was saying that shame and this critical patriotism dominated Polish discussions about history in the 90s and in the first years of this new century. It is worth mentioning that no public opinion surveys were ever presented to support this opinion that on the mass scale this critical patriotism really became dominant. Rather the reverse. The only large public opinion survey was carried out in 2003 by Pentor. The Polish title was Społeczeństwo wobec przeszłości, the Polish society and its past. And this survey demonstrated that Poles still remembered mostly heroic and glorious elements of their history. People mentioned mostly heroism in the Second World War, Polish-Soviet War in 1920, the war which was won by the Poles, and the regaining of the independence in 1918. These were those historical events that Poles mentioned most frequently. Only 3% of the respondents said that they felt shame because of the negative attitudes of Poles towards Jews during the Second World War. It was after this Jedwabne debate. So by any means, it does not support the thesis that the thesis which was very important for the origins of the politics of history, that Jedwabne debate and other historical discussions after '89 reshaped the Polish historical consciousness, making shame the central part of it. For many Poles, including myself, the Jedwabne debate was a great accomplishment of a Polish state, including politicians, historians, and the public opinion. We managed to reveal a horrible truth with dignity and accuracy, and I think that it did not jeopardize the Polish standing abroad, rather the contrary. I would say that Polish-Jewish relations became much better after the Jedwabne debate than they were before the Jedwabne debate. The Polish openness was widely appreciated. And I would also say that this Jedwabne debate did not change the traditional model of a Polish patriotism. This debate rather demonstrated that we were a mature and a self-confident nation who was able to confront its whole past, not only its heroic elements. And now a few words about politics of history as it was implemented after Law and Justice victory in 2005, so during these last 2 years. In terms of new institutions, a Museum of the Polish History was established by Minister of Culture Kazimierz Ujazdowski. In a few years it should become a sophisticated and modern museum, but for the time being the museum exhibition does not exist yet, and the museum team carries out many educational initiatives, exactly the same type of work which had been done by the Institute of National Remembrance since 2002, but I would say that the Institute of National Remembrance carried out similar activities, but on a larger scale. It was simply a much bigger nationwide institution with many local branches. So certainly the establishment of a Museum of the Polish History for me was not a turning point in any sense. Another important and positive feature of the politics of history for me was the role of President Lech Kaczyński, who patronized many historical commemorations, like, for example, the commemoration of June 1956 uprising, the commemoration of June 1976 workers' revolt. President Kaczyński also rewarded with state decorations hundreds of veterans of anti-communist opposition. Many of them had been so far neglected, or at least not enough appreciated. However, I see also many negative developments which influenced politics of history and jeopardized its very meaning and its goals. First was that the main public institutions which were involved in the politics of history, those new institutions created by Law and Justice, like Museum of the Polish History and Museum of Warsaw Uprising, when Lech Kaczyński was the mayor of Justice, and also these institutions which existed for a longer time. But I would say that all these institutions, or most of these institutions during the last 2 years, were dominated by the people very close to Law and Justice Party in terms of politics, in terms of ideological values. I think that the same could be said also about the public TV, which produced many historical documentary programs. The result of this predominance of one political and ideological option was, I would say, one-sided vision of history. This vision emphasized importance of selected currents of anti-communist opposition, like armed resistance from the 40s, like importance of the Catholic Church as an anti-communist force, as radical anti-communist groups in the Solidarity movement in the 80s, especially such a group called Solidarność Walcząca, Solidarity, the militant, let's say, fighting Solidarity. On the other hand, this vision downplayed or even rejected the importance of other, softer, let's say, and more moderate opposition groups, especially of a liberal and left-wing background. This vision of history presented the round table discussions as a deal with the communists, or even in more extreme versions as a treason. Most developments in the so-called Trzecia Rzeczpospolita, Third Republic after 89, were presented as controlled by the communists and a special kind of conspiracy, układ. This word is very hard to be translated to English. Arrangement. Conspiracy, arrangement, network perhaps, układ in Polish. According to this vision, Polish democratic institutions and this independent state after 89 were at least partially fake. The whole period after 89 was often presented rather as a failure than as a success. What was really missing in politics of history during last 2 years was pluralism. If politics of history is supposed to be widely accepted, it should include a wide variety of opinions existing in the social and cultural reality, instead of imposing the views of only one part of political and ideological spectrum. The second and even more important feature of politics of history by Law and Justice was, in my opinion, manipulation of history for the purposes of current political struggle. One can quote many speeches and interviews by Prime Minister Jarosław Kaczyński, who used history to stigmatize his political opponents. According to Kaczyński, Law and Justice continued the best and most sacred tradition of the Polish patriotism, and especially of the Home Army tradition, this most important anti-German and anti-Soviet organization, resistance movement during the Second World War. While the opponents of Law and Justice, like, for example, Gazeta Wyborcza and many other people of liberal or left-wing background, were presented by Kaczyński as successors of the tradition of the Communist Party of Poland, who were responsible for the horrors of Stalinism in Poland. According to this specific interpretation of the Polish history, Adam Michnik, editor-in-chief of Gazeta Wyborcza, so this main anti-law and justice newspaper, Adam Michnik spent several years in the communist prisons, not for the sake of a free and democratic Poland, but supporting one of the Communist Party factions against another one. During the party meeting in the Gdańsk shipyard where Solidarity was born, Kaczyński identified Law and Justice with this great tradition of Solidarity, and the opponents of the Law and Justice with ZOMO. This is a Polish abbreviation of Anti-Riot Communist Police, who attacked Solidarity followers during the martial law. ZOMO was the most hated abbreviation in Poland in the 80s, and for everyone who remembers that time, it exactly evokes very bad memories. Altogether, in my opinion, politics of history, instead of building the sense of national pride and community, as it was supposed to do, this politics of history in practice during the last 2 years was very often used to exclude political opponents from this national community. This politics of history, in my opinion, became a part of a very aggressive style of law and justice politics, stimulating conflicts with many political and social groups. One can argue that it did not influence the real politics of history as this ideological project, that it was only party politics that always uses dirty tricks and slogans in every country, in the democratic state. But I cannot accept such explanation. Conservative intellectuals who created this notion of politics of history demanded that the public sphere should be full of historical references, that political leaders should not turn their backs on history, like Aleksander Kwaśniewski, who ostensibly chose future instead of history and tradition. So in the last 2 years, we could see how history was used by politicians. And for me, it was politics in history in practice. And it was also not a very optimistic lesson. for me at least. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Risking a certain simplification, we can look at the phenomena politics of history from three different perspectives, I think. The first is connected with the term politics of history, its merits, and my colleague mentioned and analyzes this problem and the function it should be performed. I think that we can distinguish three functions of politics of history: legitimizing or ideological, the second integrative activist, and the third uncovering function with the aim of showing strange false contents and defining the enemies both in internal and foreign affairs. The second perspective deals with an attempt to reconstruct the most important issue and arguments using by supporters and opponents of politics of history. And I think that the most important problem is the concept of tomorrow patriotism, let's say, or new version of Polish patriotism. And finally, the third perspective concentrates on the question what this debate is saying about us, historians, Paweł, Marek, and me, about us historians participating in it, in this debate. And I would like in my presentation to focus on the problem historians facing politics of history. The 19th century left us, I think, two images of historians which still predominate in research circles. The first one is related to the figure of the neutral observer, the impartial searcher for truth, who is guided only by cognitive pursuits. I think that the symbol of this historian, the most famous, was Leopold von Ranke. The second identifies the historian as the spiritual guide and the educator of the nation, who would like to transform history into a treasure of useful knowledge and an important part of common opinion. We may get the impression that in the debate on politics of history, both images are somehow being updated and gaining new justification. Obviously, the supporters of politics of history most often identify themselves with the latter image. The key issue is, in this context, remains the relationship between historiography and social life, especially politics. As usual, the starting point is the diagnosis of everything that happened in Poland after 1989. According to one side of the debate, the characteristic feature of this period was that historians believed that the role of the researcher could replace that of the judge and citizen, and politicians occupied themselves with politics of history, choosing a future without any reference to the past. In the opinion of the supporters of politics of memory, the division between the scientific and the public sphere is inherently false and artificial and cannot be sustained. One characteristic statement of this point of view goes, quotation, "I cannot completely understand how a historian can declare that in reality he does not belong to the political sphere. It is not only the question of the contrast between the historian and the politician who comes from outside and is demanding of or suggesting something or wants to use his knowledge instrumentally. Politics, in its broad sense, is present in the historian's very activity, in such elementary issues as choosing a subject for research and presentation. I think that politics does not exist somewhere else. It is an inherent part of all human activity and therefore of the activities of the historian. His decisions, this is the conclusion, are political par excellence and should be treated as such. From this perspective, one may add that the results of historical research are not used only for scientific purposes, but should also contain some educational aspect. Supporters of politics of history want to legitimize two types of historical discourse in regard to their social role, the academic and the popular scientific. According to them, historical research is a mission that is clearly described by one researcher as follows, quotation, "History implies some obligation. We cannot revive the imagination of young generation only with souvenirs. We must show them certain tasks for history if they want to feel the value of being Polish." Opposing this, we find the voices of those representatives of historical circles who favor the first of the above-mentioned images of the historian. They are afraid of involving the historian in current politics for presenting his political views and ideas clearly contradicts the idea of independent historiography. Here is one example. The sphere of the past should remain the autonomous domain of researchers and should not be given away to the prosecutors who rule memory according to the interests of the state or raison d'être. Other researchers know that there are two ways of dealing with history, gratuitous and mercenary. In the former case, even the worst true is better than a lie. In the latter, the researchers favors the selective and instrumental aspects of science. There are some radical opinions among the opponents of politics of history. The description political historian sometimes becomes the personification of someone who knows what he knows and does not bother to prove it and moreover insults others. It is an image which contradicts the ideal of the historian works, to pursuit of truth, and this regards the common rules of historical methodology. The moderate voices of this seeking a compromise between the world of politics and the historical community are in a minority. My neighbor Paweł Machcewicz voiced a similar idea. In his opinion, both sides should be long-sighted and deliberate. Politicians must appreciate the significance of history, support scientific research and educational activities relating to the past, but avoid an instrumental approach. But historians at Paweł Machcewicz should recognize their civic obligations and the fact that the results of their work are important not only for them, but for the whole community. At the same time, they should guard their independence as they would protect their own eyes, avoid the temptation of court historiography, and be able to say no to the politician in certain situations. And the conclusion, I believe that such a model of cooperation is achievable, however difficult. It would simplify the picture if one thought that this layer of the discussion about politics of history revealed only a fundamental conflict between two images of historian, the independent scientist and the historian concerned about the spirit of the community. It is also an issue of the place of knowledge about the past in public debate and the question about the historian's responsibility. Consequently, the following questions become significant. First, should the researcher remain indifferent towards different modern ways of using the past? Second, it is possible to limit the above-mentioned problem of responsibility only remaining faithful to truth in the most reasonable meaning of this word and historical methodology? Or should it reach beyond the purely scientific sphere and emphasize the historian's obligation towards the community, state, national, or local? The voices of historians presented above with the emphasis on differences rather than on similarities with regard to the debate on politics of history allow us to come to what are obviously provisional conclusions. First, there can be no doubt that this debate on politics of history, which has gone on several years, has not only brought new life into scientific circles, but has also helped us all to realize that the past mentioned in the present exercise extraordinary power and constitutes an intrinsic component of our culture. Secondly, the debate has revealed, although so far only hazily, the controversy surrounding the relationship between historiography and collective memory. The reason for this situation is an almost simultaneous change in the circumstances under which professional historians operate. As Wojciech Wrzosek, my colleague from Poznań, observed in a slightly different context, historians breathe in the stereotypes of their profession and recognize the fact of breathing only when the circumstances in which they breathe change. The identification of history with memory has, I think, two consequences. One is the rapid intensification of use of the past in politics, tourism, and the economy. The other is the fact that the historian, and this is the most important for me, has lost his traditional monopoly over the interpretation of the past. Today, the historian is not only producer of the past, he shares this role with judges, witnesses, the media, and legislators. And thirdly, the debate raised the question of which model of politics of history Poland should adopt, especially in relation to our neighbors. Undoubtedly, our politics of history relates to a certain system of values. Therefore, it is worth wondering whether it should be a civic paradigm based on the notion of human rights, democracy, and pluralism, or a national paradigm emphasizing the following issues: sovereignty, the interests of the nation, and the national state. There are two reasons why it is hard to answer this question in Poland. On the one hand, Poland is in a difficult geopolitical position, and nothing was changed. Even we assume that it would be easier to achieve a compromise with the Germans using the civic or multinational code, we still have to deal with the challenge of Russian politics of history. Celebration of the 60th anniversary of the end of the Second World War and at the last articles on Russian newspapers shows that we are facing a revival of national and imperialist rhetoric. On the other hand, we must face the dilemma on which axiology should we base the program of politics of history. Are we mentally prepared to use two systems of values simultaneously? It is possible at all. Its consequences would involve compromise between the contradictory axiologies, priorities, and methods used in different cases. The debate about politics of history has already raised many such questions, I think. Only by answering them can we move beyond well-known, comfortable ways of thinking and directly add a civic aspect to history, thus protecting Polish people from the always dangerous act of usurping it. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, my communication is consecrated to the question of history treated as a factor of international relations, and I would like to start with the question about the policy of history, politics of history, as a factor which would benefit or not to Polish foreign policy. The term politics of history, referred to so often in the recent times, is one of those terms that inspires heated debates. Such a debate has been present in Poland for some time now, and it circulates primarily around the very legitimacy of the term. Yet this departs from the essence of what I would like to concentrate on, for the term itself is of lesser importance than the meaning which it carries, or the content that it is inscribed into it. Quite naturally, one needs to be above of the fact that the term politics of history was not created in Poland. Rather, it has been introduced in Polish parlance through the German language, with what is described by the German word Geschichtspolitik, a term that came to be used in Germany longly earlier. Once again, the term itself is of lesser importance. The very phenomenon which it describes is of key significance. Politics of history constitutes a phenomenon that is not a new one, and a historian of Polish historiography must readily admit that in Poland, in the interwar period, as well as under the communist regime, the state, through various means, made attempts at shaping historical consciousness. In the interwar Poland, those efforts concentrated on the dissemination of the insurrection tradition, which triumphed in Poland's return into the map of Europe, and further with the victorious war against the Soviet Russia in 1920. And this historical perspective was accompanied by a strong contempt for the conciliatory stances with regard to the occupying, to the partitioning powers that would have their part in shaping the history of the post-partition Poland. When Poland came to be governed by the communist regime, attempts were made at recreating a vision of Poland's past that would fall in line with the communist ideology prevailing at the time, ideology that was thrust on the Polish nation from without. The identity of communist Poland, which was supposed by the crowning achievement of the 1,000-year history of Poland, was built on the contempt for the Second Republic, first of all, for the interwar independent Poland, from the period before the World War II. There is hardly any society that is able to function without the very symbols, the values, the imponderabilia, which are the foundations of community, of each community. Those symbols may change or be altered in a long-term perspective. Nevertheless, their indispensability cannot be disregarded. In a pluralist society, also, is any democratic society, in any democratic society, the needs for symbols, for imponderabilia, plays a very special role, since all the attributes that divide and distinguish the people need to be balanced with something that binds them together. Undeniably, the politics of remembrance require long-term efforts and hardly any casual moves. It is essential to come to understand that prerequisite. The fact that the past has an influence on the present, that history is a political science, in quotation, that very fact, this fact is not new. It is a reality that simply needs to be taken into account. The ties between history and politics constitute permanent preconditions. History is a political science, as Alexis de Tocqueville clearly stated. The unexpired value of historical arguments in shaping international relations was acknowledged in early 20th by Polish historians, for example, by Władysław Konopczyński, one of the most important personalities in Polish historiography in this time. Indisputably, the variety of influences that the past holds over the present in the life of nations is self-evident. A well-known French historian, François Furet, the author of the very well-known book La Passée d'une illusion, would write that there is nothing such an untainted historical interpretation. The history which is written is still embedded in history. It springs from history. It is the product of an impermanent ex definitione relation between the present and the future, an assembly of the particular traits of an individual mind with a vast ground of its possible roots in the past. I'm finished in quoting. Thus, politics, being a matter of the present, must necessarily relate to the past. In its own way, history shapes politics and politics influence history. This by no means implies that there is no historical truth, that it is the politics which define what the historical truth may be. Evidently, an opposite approach exists in historiographical tradition. Our times have witnessed the pursuit of the perspective holding that that more history means more conflicts, conflicts that tear societies apart and divide nations. More than once, we have seen the manifestations of the strong opposition against politicizing history, The view that history intoxicates relations between the nations had been the fundament of the well-commented manifesto against history written by Paul Valéry, Regard sur l'état actuel del monde, published in 1932, where the author expounds on the deadly chemistry of the intellect, which is history for him. Let us also to mention that Paul Kennedy, famous historian, well-known historian, who would write in 1972 about the decline of politicizing and nationalistic history. The experience of history, politicized, ideologized, is deeply rooted in the consciousness of Polish society, in Polish intelligentsia, and for those very reasons, a prerequisite for an earnest politics of history to be pursued lies in the effort to select those elements of the past which are of particular importance and which, in fact, are constitutive for our identity and the community today. The process of selecting tradition, selecting that to which every nation has a right, but equally that which every nation creates its own way, should not lead to oblivion for those of history's events that have been less honorable, and neither should it lead to manipulation. I would like to consider one question which is, I suppose, of utmost importance, and this question is the vision of Polish state abroad. And I suppose that these problems is a very important field of the policy of history, which should overcome this vision. It would be a mere platitude to state that the international status of given country always depends on such objective elements as the territory and population, economic potential, etc. All that is beyond doubt, yet it is equally clear that the status of the country is shaped by its past understood as a significant and weighty factor. Undeniably, the perceptions of a given nation are influenced by its past, and it would be highly irrational to disregard the very fact that formulating long-term political goals. Considering this issue, I would like to mention on what seems to me the most pressing question today. One of the great challenges facing Poland's foreign policy is the attempt to change the perception of Polish state and Polish nation in the West. Every historian who is familiar to the history of Poland's diplomacy over the past century must admit that the question is very important. It would be a mistake to think that the problems which Poland faces and which relate to its perception abroad are new. It would be a great oversimplification with the enormity of negative opinions on Poland in the past 2 years through the mere prism of unfavorable attitude toward brother Kaczyńskis. The sources of that phenomenon reach much deeper. The events of the past 2 years have rather delivered reasons and perhaps a pretext to reveal in the West the old-time negative stereotypes of Poland with new force. For a historian of diplomacy, it seems appropriate here to reach to the history of Poland's foreign policy in the interwar period prior to 1939. In the view of the world public opinion, our country does not enjoy a sufficient recognition of its rights and interests, which have been long forgotten for the period of our bondage. Such were the words spoken in 1926 by Polish Foreign Minister August Zaleski. Such was, in a sense, the foreshadowing legacy of the great bondage, of the great slavery. Having inherited it, the Polish state must struggle with the opposition of that part of the world opinion unfavorable to our return into the international arena. It is striking how accurate has that assessment proved to be. In fact, those very words could well come to be repeated by a Polish politician today. Surely the negative stereotype of Poland abroad was the result of the partitions, a consequence of the lack of statehood and outcome of the situation that prevented Poles from voicing their own opinion. Under the influence of the historiography developed in the by the partitioning powers, and particularly by Prussian historiography, German Prussian historiography, a stereotype of Polish anarchy was born, and stereotype of Poland as a state incapable of functioning was very, very hard, it was crucial for this vision of Polish state. That stereotype was then strengthened and thus it survived. Poland demonstrates constant disarray, anarchy, and flourishing infinitely. Poland is presently a state of anachronic anarchy, was the assessment by these historians. Following the World War II, the old stereotype of Polish anarchy was only favored by the German references regarding Poland as a Saisonstaat, and the arguments that attempted to show the civilization-grounded inferiority of Poles, the capability of Polish anarchy and economic collapse, Polnische Wirtschaft, for example. For decades, the Western historiography was dominated by the image of Poland as a state of disarray. The stereotype of Polish anarchy was a notable element of the Black Legion of Poland in the West. The very stereotype offered a highly suggestive justification for the partitions of Poland. The loss of the statehood, the consequences of which have featured so prominently in historical writing, results in Poland ever since 18th century, and with a brief exception of the interwar period oscillating between limited freedom and total submission, as wrote Polish historian Tadeusz Łebkowski. The Polish state proved unable to defeat the negative stereotype of Poland. Today, it is capable of doing just that, but are its efforts sufficient? It is the question. It is the very important question. And I suppose that by these remarks, I would like to let us to consider this problem as one of the most important fields of Polish historiography of today. Let us make some conclusions. First of all, the state, I suppose that state must play its important role important part in fulfilling the duty of cultivating the remembrance of those past experiences, which in a particular way condition our identity. That is beyond dispute. It holds the obligation to regain the grounds lost under the half-century-long communist domination and the hardly independent Polish statehood. Thus, it is not an issue of what politics of history might mean, but rather the question of what conditions should be met for it to be effective to serve the interests of national community. Changing the perception of Poland possesses a great challenge for the Polish state, and of weakening of the negative stereotype of Poland stands as the most fundamental goal. The deeply rooted historical stereotype persists, delineating their surprising strength in shaping the perception of nations would definitely require a distinct study. For example, the voluminous monograph should be necessary in this question. Their strength is indisputable today. It stands as a particular paradox that in the period of revolution in communications, at a time when borders cease to exist, the nations and peoples are drawn closer to each other. The power of stereotypes in mutual perception of the nations hadn't been weakened. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. We have time for questions, and I open the floor. Professor Volkenier, would you mind, Elizabeth, going to the microphone, please?
A very simple factual question of Mr. Marcevich, namely, how did this affirmative patriotism favored by the Law and Justice Party affect textbooks and history teaching in high schools and at the university? And to what extent was it also affected places like the Institute of History? Or was it?
Well, I would say that whatever you prefer.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let's take a few questions.
I've got rather comments than questions, but of course I understand that it would be answer from a comments, because it's very difficult for me to agree with brilliant explanation what's happened in Poland made by Professor Marcevich. At the beginning, as far as I know, there is some misunderstanding, because if I know the people who used this term of politics of history, they never told that this project of politics of history, which existed before, but which wasn't named, it was politics, it was kind of pedagogy built on the fear of the rising Polish nationalism, that they never understood that they were fully successful. No. So these results of these polls, nothing changed. But we could compare it with another results of the polls. If we are asking the polls how they understanding, how they estimate themselves, it would be this very strange results, that the polls, if we compare with another nation of Europe, they underestimate themselves comparing with another nation. There is no such a because the people who use this pedagogy at the beginning of 90s, showing rather shameful side of our history, and to be afraid to emphasize the heroic past. They were afraid of this rising of nationalism, rising of national pride, etc. But in reality, we couldn't find such attitude among the Poles. It is rather the complex of inferiority. So we could say that this pedagogy successful in certain sense. Of course, you mentioned that they were, of course, they weren't neglecting the anniversary of heroic events, etc., etc. But I could give one example. It was 94. In Gazeta Wyborcza, it was 94, that was 15th anniversary of Warsaw Uprising. It was the biggest article which was devoted to the one history, that is, it was one criminal groups who killed the Jews among the AK, that means National Army, who killed the Jews. Of course, it was the most important, the biggest article about it, which provoked a lot of debate in Poland. And there is question if there really such a, and this fact was proven. That was the truth. But there is a question if it's really reflected what's happened toward Jews. What was the attitude of the AK toward Jews? And you said that debate about Jedwabne, nothing changed, was rather better for Polish-Jewish relation. I'm not so, it isn't so evident for me, because if I know, I've got such a discussion with them, the lot of people from Israeli haven't known that the AK defended Jews, that they were even the cellule to fight for the Jews, that they were condemned the people who denounced the Jews, etc. But there's another problem with Jedwabne. I'm absolute. It was the reason to raise the public debate about Jedwabne. I agree. But look, the people who raised this debate, who said that it is obvious that we have to debate it. It is a dark side of our history. We have to deal with it because there's this necessity. The same people repeat to us for a long time that what's happened before 89, it isn't important. The same people. It was Gazeta Wyborcza, it was Adam Michnik. It isn't important what happened. And we are born at 89, it isn't important what's happened, and this history means nothing for us. And looking for the reason what's happened now in Poland after the fall of communism in the communism is something misunderstanding. So it was also this element of this pedagogy, which was politics of history, of course, because we couldn't, I think, we couldn't imagine state without politics of history. Of course, we don't need this name. But how could we imagine the state, which is responsible of the education, of the system of the education, of not only the state is in some kind of emanation of the collectivity, which is rooted in the past. The past is only things which we have. We don't, the future don't belong to us. So, how could we imagine this state without this politics? So, if there is such a politics, it's better to say it, because this kind of pedagogy, which was based on this reflecting shadow, this dark side of our past, and to showing that we have to be very prudent with our history, because always these heroic events were combined with terrible mistake, not only mistake, but the crime, etc. It was the kind of pedagogy, but it was with hypocrisy, because it was showing as the real truth. So maybe I'm talking too much, but I think that there are a few questions, even for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Lavinia?
Just a quick question. Are there any opinion polls reporting on interest in transitional justice politics of history? And I'm not talking about necessarily opinion polls carried in 2007, also in 1990s, if you know. And is there any evidence for a generational gap?
Yeah, I have a questions, comments on the 3 points. One point, this is the situation you both described as a before, especially Paweł Marcewicz, as a before this new politics of history. And I think we have to differentiate 2 levels. Let's say professional historiography, and then how the political public, state react and adopt this, on the level of the historiography, what historians have done at this time. I remember when we met first time, you said to me something what was very shocking for me at this time, because you said you were at this time vice director of the Institute of National Remembrance. Yeah, there's a consensus between us as an institute. Yesterday, Piotr Naimski said we should defend it. Yeah, we will do. Yeah, but you said to me at this time we were talking that in Poland there's no one historian, younger generation, who is dealing with the Nazi occupation of Poland. Then I have met younger historians, a huge group from the Warsaw German Institute of History, who are working, and they were astonished, archive are now open up and so on. Also, many other topics. We are talking about, you mentioned in your speech about how German historians are dealing now with the GDR. Every aspect of GDR histories, every element of resistance is registered. I am afraid that in 20 years, if somebody looked, at the Columbia University library and will look and see 100 books on German resistance against communism and 2 books by Marcin Kula about Solidarność movement and some other, then you see, they will be out of the proportion. So I would say, even on this level, before the institute, because the institute was, of course, done as a work which we all appreciate. But before, and there's the questions why it was so. And so I wanted to refer to you what you say. Of course, there's always axiology behind. You are, as a historian, are also public intellectuals. Yeah, even if they are, they have professional method and so. It was very the Beethoven, to speak with Max Weber, it was atmosphere of the time. That mostly, I just finished the project about concerning Ukraine, Lithuania, and so. The most interesting works done by the younger Polish historian were very critical about Polish politics. You can, because it was about minority politics and so on, so general. Nobody was interested in the German occupation because it seems to be old stuff. That's why, and I go on the other level, because after 89, and this is the disagreement, I think that they were at least, and you tried to reconstruct on one level in your paper, this concept of the policy of history as a part of a kind of new political philosophy or public philosophy. As I say, it's emerged as a part of diagnosis there's something wrong with Polish democracy, and the question was what was wrong. And I was convinced, and many of my colleagues were convinced, that it's because there are the other concept, how the Polish democracy should develop, what they were, and they all were against so-called affirmative political history of politics. For instance, post-Solidarność, as a liberal post-Solidarność group, stream, with ideas such, I cannot develop the civil society, but ahistorical civil society, Europe, constitutional patriotism taken from Habermas, For instance, I remember, the first discussion with Jedlicki about, is there any collective memory at all? Yeah, it was, in this ideology, because you can reconstruct this. We are referring to many publicists, Majcherek, Michnik, many, yeah, and so on, Wolf-Pawelska, and so on, Jedlicki. You can see why they thought, because, and it was mentioned already, because of the thing that the most dangerous things for Poles are nationalists. After 1989, we defeated communists, probably what is the fear as maybe nationalists. Then there was a liberal group. If you remember what Donald Tusk once said about and the people from the Gdańsk about to be Polish, or the Polish identity, the Polish way in the history, it's abnormal. Yeah, it's a very difficult history. Yeah, it's abnormal because it's a you were always defeated. Yeah, so you have it was not according to the values of liberal success. And the second as a big political group, because there are also political actors, were of course post-communists. And if you take now what is very difficult to do, these political speeches delivered by Kwaśniewski, for instance, to the martial law anniversaries, to Solidarność anniversaries, you could reconstruct actually what was the philosophy of the state. And it was not this one, because, of course, post-communist had not, he has no really interest. He also functioned as a president of all Poles, and tried to reintegrate in his language also, some positive aspects of the Polish history, but it was very difficult. So this is why it's changed, it's changed. And once again, of course, never, you said something about, about pluralism. I don't think that pluralism before, especially in the mid-90s, was greater than today, or last two years, because I think that one of the projects was dominated. Now, what you made that later in your paper, you identified this kind of public philosophy and the kind of conception with the party politics, with the politics of the party law and justice. So I think it's a little unfair, because we can talk about this politics and about what was done in the last 2 years. But nobody of these intellectuals you mentioned, besides of Ujazdowski, who was Minister of Culture, was involved directly in the politics, especially not in party politics. It is not I would say it's the opposite case, that the party law and justice tried to use some concept which were in the public sphere and push it forward. But to say, I think they also, you didn't mention also some positive things as made during these 2 years. Many conferences given by the Museum of Warsaw Uprising. The idea, for instance, that we organize also, according to the, in the case of the former German territories, that we are not only be critical about, Steinbach and so on, but to reconstruct the history of the before, direct after 45 of the people who were moved from the East Polish territories to the West, so-called ośrodek ziem odzyskanych. Many, Solidarność Walcząca, many, you mentioned this. I think, we were both with Bronek in Wrocław to commemorate the commemoration of this people of Solidarność Walcząca. I was very moved, because they are very courageous people. But they were totally neglected. They are losers. Yeah, they are not rich. Yeah, they are not. They became not important politicians. They are not known in the world. Yeah, but they were courageous people. And you see, I think it was what was the achievement of these two years, that this one-sidedness and the lack of pluralism and the lack of pluralism memory was a little, removed. Third point, it was never said that this affirmative politics of history should be a kind of, mythological expression and neglect of all negative sides of the Polish history. I myself was in the Jedwabne debate and so on. But I would say nobody, I saw always it is exaggeration to consider Poles as the most bad serious perpetrators in the history, like in the book from Norman Naimark and the others. So it's not. I think it's not the case, and it is not. So I think it's too easy to say that on the end it was a kind of striving for monumentalization, uncritical monumentalization of the Polish history. It is not the case. If we look why the Warsaw Museum of the Warsaw Uprising has success, because it's a modern, it's appeal to the younger generation, but it is not apologetic. It's affirmative in this sense that the shows the same we were saying in the first Polish Republic. The show also that this country has something long tradition, long in the European history, and can something contribute to European present.
Okay, Lucia, last question.
I would like to congratulate Mr. Konrad on his great perception, I think, of the root of some of the, at least, I consider important Polish sort of image in the world in the partitions. I think that's been totally neglected, and even as far as I know Polish history, there hasn't been really an exhausting discussion of what were the causes of Polish partitions. And I want to tell you that from what I know, this is really deeply rooted in the world, and you can see it in the United States, that actually an important part of the reaction to Polish partitions is part of the political tradition in the United States, and that has to do with the Americans decided that the cause of Polish partitions were the fact that the kings who were elected in Poland were foreign-born. And therefore, there was this great emphasis in American Constitution, and I was reading it in American constitutional history, that no foreign-born person can become president of the United States. And then there's this myth of a Manchurian candidate, which is the guy who disguises his foreign origin, and actually he acts in the interest of the foreign power while he's governing the United States. And this is true in popular culture and in sort of in American history. So I think that this is definitely an area that should be discussed further, and maybe again looking from the point of Polish point of view, what were the causes of partitions in Poland, and whether it was truly this disarray or there were other things. But this is, I think you're very right that this still exists in foreign perceptions of Poland.
Thank you, Lucia.
The first question concerned the problem of textbooks, both on the university level and at schools. As far as the university level is concerned, universities are absolutely autonomous, and the government did not have any tools to influence the textbooks. I don't want to say that the government wanted to influence the textbooks at universities, but it would be impossible, in fact. The situation is different, a little bit different as far as schools are concerned. This is Ministry of Education which accepts, which chooses the textbooks, but the rule is that usually for each level of education there are more or less 10 to 20 various textbooks, but each of them has to be approved by the Ministry of Education, and teachers can in each school choose whatever book they regard as the best. And the problem with the Ministry of Education is that the Ministry of Education was a very extreme politician, Roman Giertych, even not from the Law and Justice Party, but from the League of Polish Families. And Roman Giertych tried to influence the textbooks. Quite recently, the Polish press published information that Minister of Education tried to reject 2 textbooks because a reviewer wrote that one textbook included too much about Polish anti-Semitism, and another textbook mentioned the invasion of a Polish army of Zaolzie in Czechoslovakia in 1938. What would be the English word for Zaolzie? Transolza?
Yeah,
Transolza. So I think that in case of Ministry of Education and textbooks, this process somehow has been initiated, but this was only the very beginning. Now, Bronisław Wilczstein.
Artur.
months to 2 years. Okay?
Microphone.
The whole process of the acceptance of the textbook at the Ministry of Education takes like between 18 months and 2 years, which means that even if Giertych was that skillful to find reviewers who would stop unpleasant textbooks, well, he's not in the ministry anymore for some time.
This is a good news.
And this is not a news at all. Okay, even if there were attempts like this, they were just, fruitless because of these, bureaucratic machinery, and 2 years is just the term of the old government in power. So,
but this is exactly what I said, that it was just the beginning. And if Roman Giertych stayed in office longer, I would imagine that this process could be completed, perhaps.
The conclusion is that nothing happened.
I said that such a process was just initiated, and that it was only the very beginning. Now, Bronisław Wilczstein mentioned this article by Michał Cichy in 1994 about Warsaw Uprising and about the soldiers of the Home Army who murdered Jews. And I agree with that it was one of the most extreme examples of this, let's say, critical approach to the Polish history. And I think that he was criticized afterwards even by many of his colleagues from Gazeta Wyborcza. But I would also say that Gazeta Wyborcza, apart from this article by Michał Cichy, published hundreds of articles about Polish history, Polish opposition, anti-communist resistance. The problem of Gazeta Wyborcza was not that it neglected history, but that Adam Michnik imposed his own views regarding the agreement between Solidarity and communists, and regarding any possible kind of coming to terms with the legacy of dictatorship and so on. But it didn't mean that Gazeta Wyborcza neglected history. In every year you could find dozens of articles regarding history. And I wouldn't say that this line symbolized by Michał Cichy was dominant in Gazeta Wyborcza. I think that it would be, exaggeration saying that Michał Cichy with this article was a symbol of this main current of publications in Gazeta Wyborcza regarding history. And now you mentioned Jedwabne debate. Just to be strict about facts, I remember that it was Rzeczpospolita who started this debate, and excellent articles by Andrzej Kaczyński. And I would say that Gazeta Wyborcza was very reluctant in the beginning to deal with this issue. And then some people who work in Gazeta Wyborcza told me that it was Adam Michnik who didn't want to start this discussion in Gazeta Wyborcza because he thought that it would jeopardize Polish-Jewish relations, that it would arise Polish anti-Semitism. nobody could control this debate because mass media are out of any control, and it was just the news. It was the news for the media that Poles in 1941, quite long ago in fact, but still it was a news, murdered Jews, and it was impossible to control this debate by anyone. And Zdzisław Krasnodębski mentioned our conversation which we had in the Institute of National Remembrance several years ago, and this is true that I told you that I really had a problem because I wanted to hire historians, young historians who would deal with the time of occupation, Second World War, and I couldn't find such people. But the problem is that after 1989, Polish historians felt that the research regarding Nazi crimes was so abundant, was so extensive during the communist time, that this subject is not worth any further examining, that now the time has come to deal with the research on the communist dictatorship, which is quite a logical approach because new sources were released. First, the abundant archive of Polish Communist Party, which was not explored even now by historians, only to some extent. Then the documents of security apparatus were released when the Institute of National Remembrance was created. So myself, when I came to the Institute as the head of Research and Education branch in 2000, my idea was that I should create a team of historians who would deal with history of the communist dictatorship. My impression was that the Second World War is the time which is, in a way, less important, that the issue, the real issue is now to study extensively the communist dictatorship. But the quite unexpected coincidence was that in the year 2000, Jan Tomasz Gross published his book, Neighbors, and the whole discussion regarding Second World War, Polish-Jewish relations, then Polish-Ukrainian relations started again. Another factor was this, let's say, offensive, new dynamics by the expellees, Erika Steinbach, which again brought back the Second World War as the central issue to the Polish conscience. But I think that it was in a way inevitable that the great majority of historians dealing with the 20th century, after 1989, they thought that the time has come to study not the Second World War, which was studied during the communist time, especially Nazi crimes. It was certainly the topic which was not neglected by the historians during the communist time. So we simply wanted, and I'm saying about myself because I started my academic career in 1989, I wanted to deal with the time of the communism because to me it seemed most important, new, and very fresh field of research. And also, Zdzisław Krasnodębski said that I was unfair by identifying politics of history with party politics, treating politics of history as a part of party politics. But in my opinion, it was the case. I would say that most of the people who created, for example, Museum of Warsaw Uprising, most of the people who published articles about politics of history and deliberately using this term politics of history, they identify, this is not that I identified them with Law and Justice. They were very close to this party. They were intellectuals who were involved in many initiatives who were started by this party. People who created Museum of Warsaw Uprising, they all became members of parliament in the ranks of Law and Justice. They became ministers in the government or in the chancellery of President Kaczynski. So my opinion is that I published in Poland, in Polish, an article with the title, How Politics Harmed Politics of History. And this is my idea that it would be much better for politics of history.
Excuse me, only one.
Microphone.
One of them, for instance, was candidate of the Minister of Education from Civic Platform, 20. I mean Karłowicz, for instance. The other worked on the, I just wanted to say that this division was late. At the beginning, in 2005, there was a project of both parties. Yeah? All these people, besides you mentioned Ołdakowski and Lena Cichocka and Paweł Kowal, who were, not Kowal, yeah, the other intellectuals who came not as a politician to this project, work also from Jan Rokita. As I said, one of the leading person in this team was he was proposed to be important minister in the government, in the future government of Jan Rokita. Me, myself, I should be an advisor. As Jan Rokita asked me to be his advisor as a sociologist. So it doesn't mean, this is, we have to differentiate the party politics and what happened then from a kind of more general project. And of course, it's so that then all the parties changed their position, one radicalized it. Today, probably, Civic Platform is another party that it was different party that it was 2 years ago. But
well, you are right, but you are right with respect to the situation before 2005 election. There were many intellectuals who were somehow cooperating both with Jan Rokita and Jarosław Kaczyński. But in my opinion, after the 2005 election, many of those people who took part in inventing this notion of politics of history became deeply involved in the law and justice, not only politics in the narrow term, but in many, initiatives which were somehow close or initiated by, close to the party or initiated by the party. And you can be a follower of a party, not only being a minister, but also publishing articles in the press, which you did. I read many your articles, and I think that you would agree with me that you were much closer to Law and Justice party in your analysis, defending this party, than to any other party. So this is not the question only of holding some political posts, but also of defending a policy by one party. The problem is that I would sympathize with many ideas which were formulated during these discussions in 2003, 2004, that history should be somehow appreciated more than it was in the 90s. But I didn't like the political instrumentalization of this debate, and simply two radical statements, downplaying many important initiatives which happened before 2004, before 2005. I simply cannot accept the argument that before Law and Justice came to power, history was neglected. As the head of Research and Education branch in the Institute of National Remembrance, as early as in, let's say, 2002, I supervised every year 30 new exhibitions organized by 11 local branches of Institute of National Remembrance. Most of these exhibitions visited several towns, even small towns. So it was a real turning point for me. And saying that the history was neglected by public institutions in Poland before Law and Justice came to power is simply, simplification. So, well, as I said, in my opinion, politics harm politics of history. It would be much better if much bigger distance was kept between what we call politics of history and party politics. And one other very concrete question regarding opinion polls. I know opinion polls with respect to lustration and opening of the files of the secret communist police. And the great majority of respondents were in favor of opening the files, in favor of lustration. And one important factor was that the younger the people, the more in favor they were of opening the files. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavel. Would anybody else like to comment?
I would like to add some comments. I agree with Pavel, and I think that historical circles in Poland is strongly divided when we are talking about the politics of history. I think there are, of course, affirmative approach like Andrzej Nowak and a lot of skeptical like Marcin Kula. The second remarks has semantic character. I don't know what the apology really means, but I would like to quote the brochure popularizing the idea of opening of Museum of Polish History, and we can read there. In the museum activities, the emphasis should lie on what was unique, specific, and fascinating in Polish history. Poland is a country with one of the longest republican and parliamentary traditions in Europe, the country of citizens' freedom, which reached a unique level of the religious tolerance in modern history, the country of unique culture and custom. In my opinion, this is a good example of apologetic approach to Polish history. It's of course difficult to make distinctions, and the problem, politics of history, is it a party politics or not? In my opinion, most of the prominent politicians connected with law and justice present this concept as a real part of their political program. So they somehow usurping this idea of politics of history, and it influence at the attitude of circle of historians in Poland. It is a result of this activity. And one more question connected with Mr. Krasnodębski comments about the lack of Polish historiography in Western historical science. This is a problem. Who is responsible for the black legend of Poland in Western historiography, and this lack of Polish synthesis, monographs, articles, and so on. And I think that first of all, we historians are responsible for it, and it's astonished that we can say only one name of Norman Davies as a representative of Polish historiography in the West nowadays, and I appreciated his books very, very much, but it's not enough, I think. Thank you.
I would like to refer to the words of Professor Krasnodębski. He recalled us about the problem of the weakness of Polish historiography and in the weak presence of Polish historiography abroad. This is the very important problem. We have many books about not only about German resistance, German opposition to Hitler, and very little about Polish Home Army, about Polish underground movement, but also about, for example, Polish foreign policy of the interwar period, about the activities of Polish diplomacy in this time in the international arena. And this is the question which is very important today for us, and this situation should be changed. But how to change it, it is another problem for another conference. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're at the end of this period, and we promised to leave some time at the end of our day to return to things that we were talking about last night and this morning. So if anybody would like to approach something that they didn't have a chance to finish, I invite you. And please just mention to whom you direct your question or your comment.
Actually, I don't want to address it to anybody in particular. It's about the historic policy and lack of that in Poland and the reasons. I think that one of the reasons is that majority of influential so-called intellectuals or public opinion makers in the early 90s in Poland, many people of this circle was simply afraid of history. I mean, they were afraid personally about history. They were afraid about history because they were, many of them, once again, they were dissidents. What does it mean, dissident? Dissident means not somebody who fought the communism, because many people fought communism. Some of them, they were dissidents. Dissidents from somewhere, from the communist structures or communist party. And those people, they were somehow scared about revealing the history of the communist years in Poland, because it would touch themselves directly many times. And this was one reason that they were somehow, if not against the research of the recent history in Poland, they were not in favor. They would not promote it. The other reason was that they were taught, grew up in the opposition, being children, in the opposition to the pre-war Poland, in the opposition to the Second Republic. It wasn't their own experience because they were too young, but it was for sure the experience of many fathers of them. And their fathers, their father's experience was a bad experience because of many different reasons. But once again, many of them really didn't like Poland between the wars. And the discussion about recent history, modern history of Poland would touch this point once again, and they didn't want it. So those reasons combined, they made the result.
Anybody else?
I have a specific question directed to all members of the panel. What is the best book to read to inform yourself in any Western language, including Polish, of course, Western European language or Polish, about property transfers, that is, the transfers of Polish state property during the period of shock therapy in the early 1990s, how former top-level civil servants of the Polish People's Republic became overnight capitalists, bought and sold this property, how they might form the social basis of the new elite in Poland. What would you read to inform yourself about the beneficiaries of shock therapy?
I don't know.
There is a book published by Andrzej Zybertowicz regarding the role played by former security functionaries, but not only in the economic processes, but this is a larger approach in the whole transformation process.
The Polish title is W uścisku tajnych służb.
Zybertowicz, Z-Y-B-E.
Anybody else have a comment or a question? Well, then let me say some concluding remarks about the last 2 days. The job of our small center, the East Central European Center at Columbia, is to explore a variety of issues that are of interest both to students and to faculty, things that are both historical and contemporary. And every semester we try to do something different. Somebody asked me earlier or yesterday why we picked dealing with the past, the choice of which historical model you wish to promote, and illustration. And I guess the answer is because it was there. Now, when we thought of it, we figured that it was going to have much more of an impact than it's having today simply because of the political atmosphere in Poland. And we also thought that this would be a good time to explore and compare what is going on in countries in the region. And we learned a lot. One of the things that comes out of a conference like this, even though I don't see our Czech colleague in the room, is the information on the opening of the Czech archives, which is a very recent development and which may have an impact on how those people, the authorities in countries around the Czech Republic, will now begin to view how they should pursue access policies in their respective countries. And as we listened over the last couple of days, we all know that there's no one simple answer for everyone, and that countries are going at different speeds. So we may very well expect to see, under this new government in Poland, some changes in access to the archives of the Institute for National Remembrance, and perhaps even to other archives that are available at this stage only to researchers in Poland, but may be under a slightly different policy within the next few years. And I think that that's a very good thing. If there's one thing that came through, particularly from this discussion today, it's that the things that we're talking about are not a new development. People have been questioning what happened in the past, and each generation has come to a different conclusion about each country's history. Zdzisław Krasnodębski, in his remarks just a few minutes ago, said something about Poles believing, or a group of Poles, believing that they had been defeated over time. They're beginning to sound like Hungarians. If you ask a Hungarian, they will be the first to tell you that they've never won a battle in their long history, which is not true, of course. It does express a certain pessimism about the inevitability of history and how we always seem to find ourselves back in the same spot. That's what conferences like this, I think, are good for, to reassess what current perspectives are on some of these issues. And, of course, we could only scratch the surface. I don't believe that there's anybody else writing in Poland, at least that I know of, on a topic that Marek Kornat addressed today, which is how these issues affect international relations. And it was a useful exercise to remember that people didn't start doing this when the Kaczynski twins took over. They have been doing this the whole time. So these are useful exercises for people who are in the business of addressing students and have to find new ways to explain what's going on today based on information that they may have forgotten or that they're just learning from their colleagues. And it was very nice to have somebody talk about what's going on in Romania and a decent discussion about both historical politics in Germany and also illustration in Germany. And of course, we could have covered many more countries in Europe and also placed the East Central European region into a larger context, but that would have taken, of course, more time. And that's something that we really didn't have the possibility to do. So I want to thank all of our colleagues who came from Canada, who came from Prague, who came from different cities in Poland, who came from such faraway places as North Carolina. Am I missing anybody? We have Turkish colleagues in the room who also find what we're talking about quite interesting. We intend to continue with meetings like this. Probably the next one won't have such a historical dimension. It will be more contemporary, but we are able to do this at the Central European Center because we have friends. It's always good to have friends, and it's always good to have friends who have money. We're lucky that we have the Kościuszko Foundation here in New York City and the Senate of the Republic of Poland, which acts through the Semper Polonia Foundation in Warsaw, to bolster our meager resources and to allow not purely Polish debates, but Poland in the context of a larger setting. And I would like to hope that our colleagues in other countries would have the good fortune also to find a partner institution in the United States that would like to do things with them just as we do. I think that this is what brought me to Columbia 3 decades ago, and there are other people who find this kind of intellectual exercise quite fulfilling. So on their behalfs, I'd like to thank you. I also want to let you know that hopefully within a few weeks, these deliberations will be online, and in the interim, you will probably also find some mention of it in the local press here in New York, at least in the Polish language press. So thank you very much, and until next time.